What is up, everybody? We've got Sarah Weaver here for episode 102 of the Scorch the Fears podcast. She's great. She's someone I saw on Instagram to see like how she is and how she moves and just have a conversation with her and see what we can do. So Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jonah.
100%. So real quick for my audience, just introduce yourself, say everything that you do, everything you do in real estate, anything you do in entrepreneurship. Just give a quick background for the people that don't know you.
Absolutely. So hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Weaver. I own real estate in the Midwest. Half of my portfolio is furnished. Half of my portfolio is long-term. And I wrote a book about the midterm rentals, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And it was published by Bigger Pockets. I now teach people how to invest out of state so that you can live where you want and invest where the numbers make sense. And then because people are buying properties in places that they don't live, they don't know how to furnish them. So they can use my company, Aria Design Services, to analyze, furnish, and launch their next furnished rental. That company is super fun. We make things really beautiful and really easy for our investors. And then speaking of fun, my third company, Invested Adventures, we take real estate investors on epic adventures around the world. So when I say epic, Jonah, I mean like hiking Kilimanjaro, drinking wine in the south of Italy, hanging out in Central America.
I love it. I mean, like that's what you were talking about beforehand with your team, right? Kilimanjaro is like where you're going next.
Yeah, well, I was a little bit late to the podcast because my lender called, my conventional lender, and we're supposed to be talking about a fourplex I want to write an offer on, but he's like, "Okay, I've been dying to ask you about Kilimanjaro. Like, can you walk me through this?" And so yeah, I was going through the agony of the 8-day hike that I did this summer.
Amazing. I love it. So real quick, I'm curious for myself, are you a property management company or do you just do the furnishing?
Just furnish. We will analyze a property. If you're like, hey, should I turn this into an MTR? I'm either about to purchase it or I already own it and maybe the tenant's about to move out. It's a long-term rental. Should I switch it over to an MTR or STR? We'll analyze it for you if you need that. Or if you're buying something that you know you're going to furnish, we will do the customized design and either you or someone that you hire, flies out and does the installation, or we can do it all for you. And my designer and my installer will literally make it rent ready as well as write your listing, hit publish, and you're ready to go.
What markets?
Anywhere in the world.
Okay, nice. I like it. Okay, we might be talking about that after the podcast, just because I'm buying a few in Colorado and I've got a few coming up in Ohio and Indianapolis. So when you said Midwest, I'm like, yeah, I kind of invest in the Midwest too. So I was curious, but let's get to the podcast. So Sarah, you've got all these cool things going on. You got just your portfolio, you just buying and holding. You wrote a book on midterm rentals. You have a company that does midterm rentals for other people, furnishes it for other people. And then you have a company that does like vacations, basically, it sounds like, with other real estate investors. Real quick, like let's rewind the clock a little bit. And I'm curious, just like when you were getting started out, right? The point of this podcast is to scorch the fears. It's all about getting over your fears of getting started, right? When you were just starting out, when you were just starting to buy property, or you were just starting your first entrepreneurial journey, like what fears were you dealing with and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so I was living in Denver, Colorado back in 2017. Funny enough, talking to that same lender that I just got off the phone with today, and got pre-qualified or pre-approved for my first property. And, I didn't have like the same fears that a lot of investors have, like, oh my God, what if I don't know what to do? Well, I knew what to do. I was just going to buy a house, get a bunch of roommates, and then spend most of my time traveling. And so I thought, worst case scenario, I can sell it, AKA flip it. Worst case scenario, I can live in it and be broke and have to get a second job. And so I really wasn't that scared looking back. And maybe I should have been, but I just wasn't. I think the only thing I was scared about is, is it going to be boring living in Kansas?
Right. So did you move to Kansas for your first investment?
Yes, I owner occupied. I wanted to take advantage of that lower down payment.
Gotcha. Okay. And then tell us a little bit of your story. Like, I'm curious. Obviously, I'm curious about the book. I'm curious how does one even get a book with bigger pockets, right? Like, how do you even do that? And then let's start there though. Like, I'm curious, like,
Yeah.
your story.
You apply. I mean, you reach out to publishing, you say, "Hey, do you guys have a proposal that I need to submit in order for you to look at my book idea?" And then they send you a very intimidating document that is their like proposal template, and you write a proposal. And it's about 45, maybe even 50 pages long. It's a lot of work. The proposal is no joke. You not only need to convince them that it's a great topic, but also why are you the person that should be writing the book, and then will people actually buy it? And that's all you do. You just apply, guys. Just apply.
I love it. I love it a lot. I actually, even though books are really cool, I'm personally more interested in the vacation one. Not for me personally, but I'm curious what made you want to start that because that's super interesting. I know I've had people on the podcast who've done books before. I've had people on the podcast who've done midterm rentals, but I'm really kind of curious what inspired you to start that company. And like, is it a company? Is it like more of a passion project? Like, what's the goal behind it?
Yeah, great question. So, Invested Adventures, the goal is to change people's lives. And I know that I'm sure a lot of people come on podcasts and say, like, oh, I'm making the world a better place. And I really mean it. When someone comes on my trip, they like admit fears that they maybe don't feel comfortable telling anyone else, or they make friends with people who finally get it. Maybe there's some of your listeners or even yourself, Jonah, where you're like, man, my friends like really don't get what I'm doing. Because I think what people forget is that when you choose to be a real estate investor or pursue financial independence really in any way, I just chose the vehicle real estate investing. You're a weirdo. Like that's not what Americans do. Like Americans work, they put money into their
Right.
pension or their 401k, and you maybe live off credit cards. Like trying to live differently is, or even choosing to live differently is not normal. And so invested adventures is a way for you to build a community and find connection with people like you. So I take real estate investors to just really epic places. So in addition to having connection and community, you're also getting a bucket list experience as a tax write-off.
I love it. So it was just that was just basically it. It was just like, hey, like I feel like we should change the world. Let's have some fun type of thing, more or
I
less.
think I think at the beginning I didn't realize the power that these events would have. At the beginning it was I love conferences, however I love the hallway conversations the most. So for example, like, someone maybe stood up and talked about how they are doing their first development project. Well, now I have a bunch of follow-up questions like, well, Jonah, tell me more about that. How are you funding it? How are you finding the architect? What's that process look like? But you run out of time at a conference, or maybe you're an introvert and you're like, dude, after the presentations, like I'm going back to my room and lying down because I'm drained. And so I know that there's a space and a need for these small scale events where you have time and security and asking all of those follow-up questions, and then also having people look at your portfolio. So one of the things that happens on the trips is you'll get an opportunity to talk about your biggest challenge. And a lot of times people stand up, Jonah, and they say, all right, I own this. The purchase price was this. I have this much like equity in it. It brings in this much cash flow. And they go through all their properties that way. Then they tell us, I have, $80,000 in my savings account. I have another 40,000 in a 401k and maybe 50,000 over here in this thing over here. What should I do? And then together we'll brainstorm and give you different options and different avenues that are specific to you. That's something you can't get at a conference.
So it's like a mastermind along with traveling. It's not like just fun. We're also like masterminding and trying to figure out really cool ways of making our businesses better at the same time. Am I right?
Absolutely. Every trip is a little bit different. When we're, for example, hiking Kilimanjaro, I mentioned that for a second. We're not doing a lot of masterminding because we're a
Right.
little tired, both mentally and physically at the end of the day. But of course, we're talking about real estate. We can't help ourselves. And so, a trip like that, you obviously set the expectation that you're going to get a lot of your questions answered, but we're probably not going to sit down for 45 minutes and look at just your portfolio. Whereas if you come on like a signature investor retreat, is what I call them, then absolutely that is the expectation.
Gotcha. And then um how, like, who's the ideal person for that? Is it any real estate investor doing anything, or is it somebody who's doing buy and hold, someone who's doing development? Like, who would be the ideal person to do that?
Yeah, I want people who are movers and shakers. And so if you're a looky-loo, like maybe I want to do real estate, my events are not for you. Um, but if you know that you're pursuing financial independence through real estate investing, really any investing strategy makes sense. I've had, serial flippers. I have people doing syndications, people doing, just live and flips. So they'll live in a house, 2 years later, they'll do this. It isn't a strategy specific event. And I think it's really important. I only want people to come on the trip who are open to new ideas.
I love it. I just like hearing new things. So that one like intrigues me a little bit in the sense that I'm not used to that many people doing stuff like that. So I like it because we get caught up in our work, right? And I want to talk about this for a second because I bet this is at least part of the motivation for doing it. Is I feel like as real estate investors, we get caught up in work constantly. That's like all we do ever, right? But I think it is important to take trips and like live life a little bit and remember like why the hell I did this all in the first place,
Yeah.
right? I'm curious if like you kind of agree with my perspective on that, and if that's also part of the motivation. It's like, hey, we have to like live it up and go traveling and do all sorts of cool things too with this time that we had and all the money we made from the real estate investing, right? Was that
Otherwise,
part of
otherwise,
the
what's it
motivation?
for? Yeah, I mean, otherwise,
Right.
what's it all for? Like being a real estate investor is like not for the weak. It's really hard sometimes. And then as time goes on, you look at your bank account and you're like, oh, there's like money in there. And so what is that money for? For some people, it's security. Maybe you're, paying for your parents' mortgages. And for a lot of people, it's so that they can enjoy their own life. And so I think what a lot of people need to do is when they're doing their, annual planning. So let's say that we're, goal setting for 2024. Look at your calendar. And the first thing that you should put on the calendar are vacation. And you don't need to,
Right.
go on a 21-day vacation. I realize that's not realistic for a lot of people. Some people, shockingly, don't even like travel. And that's okay, but you probably would like 3 days away. Or a friend of mine, like, drove out to Colorado to a cabin by himself because he just, like, needed some time, right?
Right.
So but what people usually do when they're looking at their calendar for next year is they're like, "Okay, we have to go to, Johnny's wedding and, Julie's graduation and Kendra's this, birthday party weekend." But is that really what you wanna be doing? Sure, I know there's obligations, but what would be really exciting? What would be an epic 2024 and an epic life? Plan that first.
I love it. For also, I'm curious, do you live in Colorado now? Or do you
I
still live in
actually
Kansas?
don't live anywhere. I travel full time.
Oh, I love that. Was that part of your goals? Was that like one of the reasons why you did this whole real estate investing in the first place? The reason why I asked is I live in Denver, so that's why I was like when you mentioned that I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
But like, what are your goals? Like, why did you personally do all of this real estate investing? Because it. Let's start there, and then I want to hear it because like I think
And
everyone has different ones, right? I think people forget. Some
it
people,
changes.
yeah, and it changes. So real quick, just tell us about your goals. Tell us how they've changed over time, and like tell us how you set goals and intentions in general.
Absolutely. So I think the first things first is being nomadic was the goal. Like I wanted the ability to live anywhere. I wanted to be able to say yes when I got invited to Carnival down in Rio and then stay down in South America for months on end. I wanted to say yes when I got invited to speak at a conference in Bangkok and stick around for a month. And so that is my why. Why was experiences and travel. And my why will change over time. Like, I'm not going to always want to live out of a suitcase. But I'm coming up on 4 years. And so it turns out I actually really do like living out of a suitcase. And then you asked one of my favorite or like one of my favorite topics is goal setting and intentions. I've been really intentional. I'm sure some people could like look at my life, especially when I post things like, oh, just bought like a last minute flight to Portugal, or oh, I actually am going to Germany this afternoon. Those are both things that I did this summer.
Nice.
I'm spontaneous and I'm also really intentional. So I intentionally built a business that would leave room for spontaneity. Or I intentionally bought a one way to Europe so that I would leave room to plan things as I go. And the real estate was no different. I bought real estate with the intention of becoming financially independent. I don't come from money. I have the most amazing parents. They're so supportive, and they've made not the best financial decisions. And I look at them and how hard they're working at the age that they are. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I just don't. And at first it was, I'm willing to take a pay cut to have a job that, gives me the flexibility to work anywhere. So I've actually worked remotely starting in 2015, worked for an American company that let me work from anywhere. And then it was like, well, wait a minute. Like I mastered this whole backpacking thing and living frugally. Well, now I would like some luxury so that when a friend invites me to do something that's more expensive, I can say yes to that. And I think that's what motivated me to level up my investing.
Gotcha. Love it. So, talk a little bit about how your childhood or how your parents living, because at least it affected me. I mean, my parents weren't very rich either. They weren't like extremely poor. They were middle class. My dad was a car salesman. My mom was a school psychologist. But I mean, it definitely affects you in the sense that, like, man, I wanted a better life than that, right? Like, I don't want to be living in a two-bedroom, one apartment when I'm 50 or 60, right?
Yeah.
So what talk about how that motivated you, or what you saw from your parents, what you took away that was really good from that, and what you took away that was really bad from that, or that held you back for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely have to credit my family for putting an emphasis on communication and being a good communicator, being a good negotiator. My parents said that I was negotiating with them like at 10. I'd be like, okay, but Tim's slumber party. And I'd like negotiate my way into getting a yes out of them.
I
And
like it.
so they taught me a lot of really transferable skills. The other thing that they taught me, along with my grandparents, is how to work hard. And so I, even this morning, like had to do some manual labor at my rental because I happened to be furnishing my latest MTR. And yeah, I could pay someone to do these things, but I also can listen to a podcast while I put together this nightstand or whatever it might be, or get paid to be doing a coaching call while I'm putting together a nightstand, even better. So I'm getting paid, double. And so they taught me these things. So I think it's important that we talk about like what good things came from that as well. And then financially, they just didn't have a backup plan. Like and by backup plan, I guess I mean multiple streams of income. So now, I mean, I believe I haven't checked recently, but I believe I have 9 streams of income. And so I
Love it.
don't worry as much about money as I see my parents worry.
Gotcha. And then, so so not worrying as much as your parents worried, was that something you saw as you were growing up? They were worrying about money, and then you're like, I'm never going to do that again. I'm fascinated by how our childhoods affect us as real estate investors. So, like,
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm
One of the
curious.
best books I've read is The Psychology of Money, by Morgan Housel. I highly recommend it if anyone hasn't read it. The Psychology of Money. It's fascinating how people think about money. I think it's twofold. So I went to a very good school where a lot of my peers' parents were doctors, lawyers, the CEO, the CMO of Sprint or whatever it might be. And I saw the vacations that they went on. One of my very least favorite weeks of school was that like week back after winter break because everyone was wearing like brand new clothes or had the newest thing, and they'd be talking about all this cool stuff that they got. And I was like, oh man, like I just don't have as much stuff. And so I'm grateful for that upbringing because I saw Like, okay, I really want money because I want stuff. But then I'm also grateful for how I was raised because stuff wasn't really what made my childhood so great. Like, my dad came to every sporting event. And if I forgot my lunch at school, like, I could call and like they could come and drop off lunch. Like, my parents were always there. And even today, like, they're coming up to Omaha this weekend to help me with a project. Like, they're really, really involved in my life. Whereas some of my friends' dads, like, they just don't have that same relationship. My dad and I went to Scotland and the UK together, because we're really close, like, we get along really well. And so I think there's good and bad that comes from all of it. I'm just glad that I was exposed to all of it. Like, I saw what money could do, and I knew I wanted it, but at what cost? And so I don't think that I am materialistic. I think that I put all of my money into experiences.
I love it. Okay, so let's talk about I want to know a little bit. So it sounds like you're mainly a buy and hold investor, right? Like, do you do anything else? Do you ever do fix and flips, wholesales, anything other development, anything, or is it just like buy and holding?
Yeah, great question. I private lend right now, so I'll lend on projects. And so I was just explaining to someone that I lend to flippers in Kansas City. And it's so fun because it feels like I'm flipping. So like they're sending me updates from the reno. I get like the same excitement when they list it, especially when they sell it, but I'm none of the stress. And so no, I don't do anything but buy and hold. And so my portfolio, I own 19 units in 4 states: Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska. I bought everything long distance or from afar. And I've done a few different financing strategies. And my idea of investing is long term buy and hold.
Love it. Awesome. Cool. I like it. How do you find your deals?
Investor friendly agents.
Gotcha. That's how I find my deals. I'm mainly a wholesaler. I know you don't know me that well, but I'm mainly a wholesale, but I do it through real estate agents. How do you find these agents? What's the system that you use? Like what does your business look like for finding properties?
Absolutely. So back in the day, so this would have been 3 years ago, I was living in New Zealand, in a van, not a van down by the river, but a van by a beautiful waterfall. And I was on my MacBook Air, in Facebook groups. So I would type in, let's say, Cincinnati real estate investing, and I joined all of the Cincinnati real estate investing groups or the local RIA. And then I would just sit back and I would just stalk the group. I wouldn't go in and type like, "Who's your agent?" Because then you always get like some bozo agent that actually doesn't do anything. They're just sitting on Facebook. But instead, I'm actually looking like, okay, who in this town like really invests? Who owns a bunch of properties? What are they doing? So maybe I see Jonah's posting. I'm like, okay, got it. He's a wholesaler. So I'm like going through all this and I'm just slowly getting to know the community. And of course, I have a spreadsheet so I can like remember everything about everyone. And then
Love it.
I'm commenting, adding value where I can, answering any questions, if I can answer. And then finally, I'll send a message and say, hey, like, I noticed that you bought blah, 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 blah property. Do you have a good agent in town? I'm looking for a duplex too. And lo and behold, that's how I built my relationship with my agents.
I love it. What makes a good agent, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think a lot of investors get this confused with residential, like, that you're buying your forever home agent. A good investor friendly agent is good at 2 things: finding deals and negotiating. And I guess a third thing, getting you to the closing table. They don't need to be great at analyzing. They don't need to be great at even returning your call. They're not, kissing your ass or sending you a closing gift. Their only job, in my opinion, is to go find me deals. And that's what makes a good agent, to be honest.
Right. Gotcha. So
What
like,
would
do
you
you
what
only
would
work
you
with
add
a
since you work with agents? Anything you would add?
uh, So, I mean, mine is very different, right? I'm looking for a very different property than you are, right? In the sense that for me, what makes a good agent is just anyone who's willing to work with me as a real estate investor. I would say the ones that actually represent me, a lot of times, because I'm working with distress scenarios, I'm wholesaling. So I'm working with people who are in distress scenarios. They're almost always representing the seller and don't give a flying poop about my interests ever. even though
Yeah.
I'm like trying to push the deal forward.
Yeah.
The ones that are actually on my side, the ones that understand wholesaling and its benefits, I think those are my favorite agents, obviously, right?
Yeah.
The ones that I'm fighting to get them paid are the most annoying to me, right? So it's a
Yeah.
little bit of a different scenario than like what you deal with buy and hold and stuff.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing I
My
would add, the other thing I would add is they're not putting me on a drip campaign. They're not setting me up on an auto search on MLS. Like,
right,
no, you look at the MLS and you send me deals. Like,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's also super annoying. I don't like it when agents do that either. Um, Yeah, no, I mean, like for me, that's what makes like a really good agent. And honestly, like I'm like I do a shotgun approach where like I work with an insane amount of agents. It sounds like how many agents do you work with? It sounds like you have a few that you really like, or what's your
Actually,
strategy?
to be honest, I really like working with one agent in a market because they can it's like dating. Like
Right,
someone can feel that you're like not all in and you're not returning their texts and that you're like
right,
playing the field. And so if an agent is performing and sending me deals, then like I'm only dating them.
right.
And then I'm looking in three markets. I invest in Kansas City, Des Moines, and Omaha. And so really
Why
those are
those
like
ones?
a bunch of different reasons. I look at population growth, job growth, wage growth, rent increase, low crime rates. I'm looking for cities where I can purchase a property at X and turn around and rent it for Y. And these markets match my
What was
criteria.
it? Des Moines,
Kansas
Kansas
City and
City,
Omaha.
Noma. Okay,
And then
cool.
the other reason is that when I was living in, South Korea, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Brazil, where was I flying back to visit family or go to weddings? Kansas City and Omaha. And I'm
Okay,
like,
gotcha.
it'd be way better if like these flights were all a tax write-off. And so I guess I need to
Right.
buy a rental there.
I like it. That's a really good way
Yeah.
to do it. For me, I own most of mine in Colorado. Like I own two in Colorado and one in Georgia. For me, because I buy it through creative financing, right? I don't know how much you know about creative financing. It sounds like you're doing it kind of the traditional way. Do you ever use creative financing in your strategies?
Oh, I mean, that's the conversation I'm always having.
Right.
And what I've done is I have house hacked, I've used private money, hard money, I've used the Burr strategy, I've had equity partners, and otherwise I'm just using conventional loans.
I love it. Awesome. So let's talk about like how did you find out about real estate in general? Like, how did this whole journey start? Like, where did you even like start picking up the book? What sparked your interest where you're like, okay, I'm gonna go to Kansas City and I'm gonna live there and I'm gonna house hack.
Yeah, a couple different things. I lived life differently from like the very get go. So I went to the University of Kansas, which is not different. I mean, half my high school went there, and the whole time I grew up in the suburbs of Kansas City. I grew up in Overland Park, and the whole time I was at KU, I was like, this is not what I wanted for my life. Like, I really wanted to get away. I wanted to learn another language and experience something new. Almost like feeling like a big fish in a small pond kind of feeling. And so that very first summer after freshman year, I studied Italian in Florence, Italy, which at the time at 19 felt very exotic. Now that I'm, 33 and I've traveled to 50 countries, okay, studying in Italy is a little basic. I'll say it. But at 19, it was wild. Like I was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing it. Like I'm living my dream. And while I was in Italy, I just was dreading going back to college so much. And so I called my parents and I was like, so I bought a one way here and I'm actually going
I love
to
it.
drop out of KU. I already talked to them. I talked to the college. They said I can defer. It's not going to like mess anything up. But I'm going to take a semester off and I'm just going to backpack Europe. And so I'm backpacking Europe at 19 and just like experiencing the world for the first time and just like learning how to read a map. This was before I had a smartphone. So I'm not that old. Like I could have had a smartphone. I just didn't have one. And I'm just like learning how to do things on my own. And I read a book the 4-Hour Work Week. Maybe not this point in the story, but in my early 20s, I read Tim Ferriss, The 4-Hour Work Week. And I was like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Like, I'm going to take salsa lessons in Argentina and Spanish lessons in Guatemala, and I'm going to work remotely. And so
I
the
like it.
only jobs that I applied for in my mid 20s were jobs that would let me work remote.
I love it. Awesome. And then, so how did the real estate come into play there?
Yeah, so one of the things that I did as a job is I did become a real estate agent. It's laughable now because I did it in a city where I didn't know anyone. And I knew I wasn't going to live there for very long. So, by the way, guys, don't start a commission based business somewhere you don't plan on living for very long. But I did. I became a real estate agent. I thought it would be, be your own boss. But the reality is that you have like 100 bosses. They're all your clients and they all want you to show houses after work. So you kind of give rid of your nights and weekends when you're a real estate agent. And I didn't like it. I love people, love selling, and I love houses. My dad worked for a construction company growing up. And so I played on dirt piles and walked through framed houses and, always loved talking to the real estate agent at the open house or, the showing house in a new development. So I loved houses. I knew a lot about houses through osmosis by being with my dad, but I didn't like, being at someone else's beck and call. And so I started looking around and I realized, some of these real estate agents are in the office all the time, always, doing roto dialers and
Hmm.
working a lot. But what are these real estate agents doing that are driving really nice cars and
Right.
not working very many hours and going on the sickest vacations? It was so fun. I know I'll never forget there was a real estate agent at Keller Williams that he's like, "Oh my God, like we're also going to Thailand. Like, where did you stay?" And I'm like, "Oh my
Nice.
God, we're never gonna stay at the same place." Like I stayed at a hostel that was like $6 a night, and you're gonna stay at, the Ritz. And he was like, "Oh, that's funny. Yeah, you're right." And so it's like I had something in common with these people that I wanted to go on those vacations and those experiences, but I liked what they were doing. And so I saw all these agents and I realized they all owned real estate. They all owned rental properties. So they not only were real estate agents who had a team working for them, so that, they had a showing assistant, a listing agent, a buyer's agent. They were a business owner as well as an investor. And I was like,
Right.
oh yeah. I was like, I read something about this in that book, Rich Dad Poor Dad and the quadrant. And I was, or the cash flow quadrant. And I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. And I more or less like stopped being an agent right then and there and pursued being a real estate investor.
I like it. So, like, talk about that a little bit because I think that's super key. I think there's something in there that a lot of the audience might miss is that really to have, at least in my opinion, what really makes you able to live that type of lifestyle or really achieve the dreams that you want, it's the mix of the two. It's
Yes.
owning a business and
Yes.
also owning real estate. Real estate is like the safe cash flow, passive cash flow. You get that in the bank. That's like nice. It's really small though. But when
Yep.
you actually have a business that your assets can depreciate against, and also you have like that active income too, that's when they're both working together to make it where you can do whatever you want. You talk about that because I think some people think they can only own rentals or they can do it without owning any rentals. And I want you to talk about the need for both of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's really important that everyone realizes that the money has to come from somewhere. And so one of the things that I think gets glorified in real estate investing is being a quitter and like quitting your job and like, living off passive
Right.
income. First of all, half of my portfolio is furnished. It's not that passive. It's a little passive. I now have a virtual assistant. She handles almost everything, but I'm still getting pulled in to do a few things here and there. And so first, it's not super passive. And also it's not going to make you rich fast. And so, yes, I now make over $10,000 a month cash flow, but it took some
Love it.
time to get there. And that's only maybe enough for a lot of your listeners that's only enough to pay for their lifestyle. So then how do you keep investing? And so what I've decided is I want multiple streams of income from a bunch of different things, but the two that I pay the most attention to are my largest cash flowing businesses, which is Aria Design and my coaching business. And then I take that cash and I turn it into more passive income in real estate. And then if there's money left over after that, then I'm doing something even more passive by either investing in a syndication or being a private lender.
Gotcha. Love it. So talk about why you did private money lending, right? It's interesting in my head. Like I feel like part of some of the communities I'm part of, it's not poo-pooed on, but it's like seen as like not as big of an option. But I've been thinking about being
Yeah.
a private money lender myself recently, just
Yeah.
because I don't think there's enough real estate opportunity right now. It's really hard for me to find deals that I really like. So part of me is like, I might as well lend out my money in the meantime.
Yep.
Is that the reason why you became a lender? What do you think of being a lender? All of that good stuff.
Exactly. It was you're watching your savings account get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you're like, okay, I could either put it into a high yield savings account and make, gosh, I don't even know what percentage, or I can lend it to a flipper at 11, 15, or even 20%. Yeah, I'm going to do that. One of the things I think is important is, and why for the, you mentioned like it getting poo-pooed on, it's not a way to build, you know, a wealth over time. It is, I'm making money on my money. And then when I get the capital back and I find a good deal that is worth investing in, I will continue to build my portfolio. I'm not only going to be a lender. And I love it. It's really, really satisfying to know that your money's working really hard for you and you clicked a few buttons. Um, Keep in mind that I say that and I make it sound really easy, but I built a very strong relationship with real estate investors because guess what? These real estate investors came on one of my invested adventure trips, sat in on one of the hot seats. So I know their entire portfolio. I've seen their personal financial statement. I know them really, really well. And I know the deals that they're doing because I also analyze the deal really well.
I love it. I love it a lot. So talk about that a little bit. Like, what would you recommend? Like, how, like, let's say someone's in here and they want to start a lending business, right? You have like a mini lending business, what it sounds like, where you just lend out the extra profits from from the trips,
Yep.
from like what I would call your mastermind, basically, but like your
Yep.
mastermind trips, your midterm rental furnishing business, because those two are the kind of like the active for you. And it sounds like you also do coaching calls.
Exactly.
So those three are your actives, I'm assuming, right? And then you
Yep.
probably got the lending.
I coach for another person's program. I travel the country. Well, actually the world. I've spoke in Canada and Thailand. So I travel doing conferences and speaking. And so, yep, there's money coming in from multiple places. And then I need somewhere for that money to go. So either
Right,
I'm going to buy a property and grow my portfolio, which I am doing, or I'm lending.
right. So, how would you start? Who do you lend to? Or like, let's say there's someone who they don't have a mastermind. What would you recommend for them to do, like, in order to start lending to somebody that they could trust? Obviously, it could be really bad if you don't know what you're doing. If you don't know how to underwrite a deal and you don't really know the person that well, you could lose all your money.
Yep.
So, what are your some recommendations for those people?
Yeah, use those same tips that I gave you guys on finding an agent. Use Facebook to really get to know your community or a community and slowly build a relationship with these real estate investors and find out who's actually doing the work and putting in the work and doing good deals. And next time they post that they're looking for funding, follow up and say, hey, just I've never done this before. What would it look like if I funded you on this deal? And then you don't have to say yes to them, but you could at least ask those questions so that you can get one step closer to figuring it out. You can go to events, go to your local RIA event. Really quickly, you're going to get to know like the who's who in the group if you're intentional with your networking. And you'll find out really quick, people talk, like reputation is everything. And so you'll know, hey, this person, do not lend to them. Like they screwed over, Garrett over here. Or, yeah,
Right.
this person's great. They always pay on time. They offer good rates. You just have to talk to people.
I love it. I like it a lot. And so, yeah, so what do you see as rates right now? Because I'm thinking about lending out my money because I've got like 150K and I'm like, all right, I'm just not finding anything for this. I should just lend out to other people on flips and shit because I don't want to flip, right? What are you lending your money out? Are you lending out at first position, second position? Does it matter? Like, are you doing like the down payments or are you actually coming in as like the main hard money lender? Like, how are you doing it?
I've done all of everything you just mentioned.
Okay.
I've brought in just the rehab money. I've brought in the entire purchase price and rehab. I've been in first position, second position. I have asked for points up front. So you're getting a fee up front, anywhere between like 1% and 4% up front. And then I've lent anywhere from, gosh, what's the lowest I've done? 10 to 17%. And so it's just absolutely going to depend on how much is it, where is the property at, who are the people you're lending to, are they experienced, how big is their database. Usually the more options they have of lenders, the lower their interest rate gets that they're offering because they have more option. And then also timeline. So for you, maybe you're like, yep, we're going into winter. I don't really see myself buying anything until the real spring market. So maybe April, May. And so, yeah, I'm open to having my money tied up for 3 to 6 months. Or are you like, I got so much money that sure, I can lend for a year or two. It's all going to depend.
Okay. I like it. Yeah. So let's get back to mindset. That was just more for me because I've been thinking about how I'm going to do it soon. Let's go back to mindset stuff. So how did you, because you're pretty out there on social media. You're part of different programs, you're doing speaking, all of that type of stuff. What inspired you to do that type of stuff? Why didn't you just buy the rentals, kind of chill out, do your own thing? What made you want to do that type of stuff?
Chill. I have no chill, Jonah. I don't even know what that word means. No, I'm only kidding. Gosh, that's a great question. I think I just always knew that was going to be what I was going to do. I hope that doesn't come off as braggadocious because anyone that knows me, I think knows that like what you're getting right now is what you're going to get all the time. And I knew that I was going to live a big life. And I knew that I would write a book. Did I know I was going to write a book about real estate investing? No. But for background, I have a journalism degree. I was a journalist. I love storytelling. I'm an okay writer, but I'm a good storyteller. And so I think telling my story comes really naturally. And then I knew that there was a need in the market for two things, maybe three. So I usually don't talk a lot about being female because it's obvious I am a girl. But I do talk about being single. Maybe Jonah in hopes that some cute guy in Denver will ask me out on a date. But also because I want people to know that they can do this without a rich spouse or without the security of a partner.
Right.
And so I talk a lot about being single, mostly because I want people to know, like, you can do this. Like, investing is not something that you're going to do like after you're established in your career or after you have a wife and kids. Like, you can invest whenever, especially if you're single. I don't have to ask anyone's permission what they think of a deal or a lending or, I can say yes because I don't have to ask for permission. So I talk about that. And then so I would say single is like a platform that I like want to talk about or talk on. And then the other is the lifestyle. I see so many people, especially in the older generation that built all this wealth at the detriment of like their relationship with their kids. And as I've already alluded to, like I have an incredible relationship with my parents and hope to have kids someday and have that same relationship. I see people build a kick-ass business, but their health is shit. And full transparency, like I'm on a health journey because traveling definitely was my priority and my health was not. And so that's what one of my focuses is right now. But I also saw people that kept telling me, and maybe this is what it is, Jonah. I know I'm saying a lot, but I think people told me, oh, I wish I could do that. They'd see something on my Instagram or hear me tell a story. Oh, I wish I had done that. And I'm like, well, then do it. Like, buy the plane ticket. And I'm not saying like sell your wife, sell your kids, sell your car, like go be a vagabond living in a van, but book the 6-day retreat if that's what you want. People with kids travel, like, believe it or not. And so I think people like making excuses, and I feel an urge to have people live their life with intention.
I love it. I love that so much. And I think there's a lot of really gems that you put in there. I used to think that it was actually like a disadvantage to be single and broke. Like I remember thinking when I started that I thought being broke was like a disadvantage. I realize now it's an advantage because you have nothing to lose, right? The issue is like tons of people who have kids, a W-2, good income, they're so scared because they have so much, they have a life to lose potentially. Well, like I don't know how old you were when you started off in real estate investing. I was 25.
I was
I'm
20.
28 now. So I literally have been it like when then I could just live at my parents' place and grind it out until I figured it out, right? So I think I'm echoing you in the sense that there is a power to being broke, being single, not needing like it's actually easier not having any money
But
to
what
do
but
real
the
estate investing.
problem, I agree with you, and the problem is that older people with kids, or even people, I mean, I guess a lot of people my age now have kids. Whew, being 33 is hard, Jonah. And they love the excuse, oh yeah, you could do that, Sarah and Jonah, because you guys were single. Like, I have a mortgage, I
Sure.
have kids, I have, and I'm like, yes, and like, you have these things, and you could say yes to this adventure, or you have these things and you could buy a duplex in Iowa. I think people love making excuses. It's comfortable. I mean, I've made excuses in other parts of my life. I mentioned briefly my health. Like, oh yeah, like, good for you that you love going to the gym. Like, that makes it so much easier. Or yeah, good for you that you eat really healthy. Like, I live out of a suitcase. It's really hard. Those are all excuses, like, and so people love making excuses.
No, I 100% agree. I mean, like, either way, they make an excuse. I don't have any money, so how am I going to invest in real estate? I have money, but like, I have the kids and the family. Like, what am I going to do about that? In the end, it's just you're going to make it whatever excuse you're going to make, or you're going to do it because someone in your position has done it before. That's really what it
100%.
comes down to in the end.
Yeah.
And guys, like, I want to emphasize what Sarah's saying here, which is whatever situation you're in, you can do it, right? Um, it doesn't matter what your situation is you can become successful like Sarah, you can become successful like me in whatever way that fits your journey of becoming successful, right? So yeah, anyways, I just wanted to like re-emphasize that for
I'm
you.
glad you
And
did.
then so in terms of so talk to someone who's like, okay, Sarah, like that makes sense, maybe I should do social media. What are the reasons I should do social media? Or what do you feel like would make it, what would be the reasons to do social media if I'm while I'm doing my real estate investing journey?
Yeah, for me, it was, getting private lenders. So I reached out to someone in the real estate space, I won't mention their name, and they were like, it looks like you care more about traveling than working or real estate." And as you can imagine, I was very offended. I was like, "Meh, meh,
Right.
meh," like, "Oh, sorry, my Instagram looks cool and I travel a lot." But he was right. He was so, so right. I needed to talk about real estate as much as I was talking about traveling. And so I did. I really, like, that day started posting about analyzing deal. And I owned a rental, sure, but it wasn't like I was like an active, doing real estate all the time. But what was I doing? Listening to podcasts. So I would screenshot the podcast. You should do that right now if you're listening to this. And then tag me, Sarah D. Weaver, and Jonah. And then people are like, oh, interesting. Like, I guess Steve's getting into real estate. And then I would join Zoom calls. You better believe I was doing a screenshot every Zoom call and posting that on my Instagram. And slowly but surely, people start realizing, huh. And so my very first, what would become my private lender, he messaged me his exact words were, "What the F do you do?" And I was like,
Oh, nice.
"Well, I travel the world and I help people make money through real estate. You guys, I own 2 rental properties. I lived in a van and I had never done a deal like that before. Never, had a private lender. But I knew, oh, okay, this is a guy who I went to college with. He's an engineer. He might be a potential private lender." So I
Right.
positioned myself and sure enough, he lent me my first deal.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, mine is a very similar story. I just did a ton of different deals, did it over again. And then eventually, when my first private money lender was from, it's like a college friend who like was also someone I had been friends with. She's a really good friend of mine, but she also saw that I was like doing the thing. So she was my first private money lender on one of my rentals, right? So guys, like there are so many different benefits, I would say, to doing social media. One of them is private money. For me, it's also deals. I don't know if you've gotten that into that yet, Sarah, where like you actually can get deals from your
Oh,
Instagram
yeah.
that are a lot better than the ones the agents find on the MLS. I
Yep.
bet, right? And then three is it grows everything. It grows every single business you own, right? So for me, I have 3 main businesses. I have my wholesaling, I have I have an agent outreach CRM, which is all about getting deals through real estate agents. Might be a good idea for you. I don't know. I don't think it's gonna actually no, it won't because you like working with one agent. This whole system is meant for like getting as many agents into your pipeline as possible and getting deals through them. But there's that, and then 3 is just owning more of the portfolio, long-term rentals for me mainly, right? Um, all 3 of those businesses are helped out by my social media. Everything is sent to me, private money sent to me, deals are sent to me. Everything is sent to me thanks to my social media presence. And so, has anyone ever talked to you about social media? Have they been like, yeah, but I'm like so afraid of it? Like, did you have any fears at all when you were doing social media? Any
Yeah.
holdbacks at all?
Oh, absolutely. Well, one, I struggle with my weight. And so as a girl, when you put stuff out there, oh man, I mean, the YouTube comments are brutal. Like they talk about
That
how
can be
fat
mean.
my neck is and how like unattractive I am. And so, yeah, of course. And like I'm a human, like that shit hurts my feelings.
Right.
So that's not fun. And then also you're afraid of saying something stupid. I think because I'm blonde, I'm always like, okay, I don't want and like I really value intelligence. I really don't want anyone to think I'm dumb. But here's the thing, I'm really secure. I'm not dumb and I'm not fat and ugly. And so people can say whatever they want. They might not like what I say. Heck, there's people that I follow that I adore, and sometimes they say things that I don't like. And so I think you have to really understand the why behind why you're putting yourself out there in your stories. And I've already said it. Like, I want to show people that they can live a bigger life. And I've had people come up to me and tell me, like, I like bought the van because I've always been a goal, and you said something on a podcast that I was like, why am I waiting? Another woman came up to me, she's in her 40s, never been married, and she's just like, thank you so much for talking about like what it's like to be like a single female. Like it
Mhm.
really impacted me. And that was the first time I realized that I had done it. So I was like, oh, so now I do it with more intention because of that. And then I think my biggest fear with Instagram, aside from the mean comments, was I didn't want people to think I was like some try hard. And
Right.
so one of the things you'll never see me do yet, not to say I won't do it ever, but I'm not really like, hey guys, like happy Thursday. This is what we're doing today, because I would never talk like that. And so I guess one of my biggest hopes is that how you meet me in person is how you meet me online. And I try to be pretty brutally authentic. Sometimes it's a little bit embarrassing, but I want to show up in the world in a really authentic way because that's the type of people that I want to spend time with.
I like it. Talk a little bit about that because I know very few people are authentic online. It's hard to be vulnerable to the entire world, right? I'm not going to say I'm insanely authentic online in terms of the bad. I never lie, but I definitely don't post every single one I've screwed up before. I have posted some screw ups before, but I definitely embellish myself. I'm not going to lie about that. But talk about like the benefits of being like fully authentic or as authentic as you can be, right? And like what that's done for you in your social media journey. It's actually something I've been thinking about. It's like, you know what? I should show a few more screw ups on here, a few more struggles than just the wins, right? Everyone online probably thinks that I'm making $100,000 a month when they don't realize that's top line revenue, right? For instance, right? But what like so like talk a little bit about like the benefits of being fully authentic versus just the embellishment part, which I'm not gonna lie, I've done it. I am a little bit, I do a little bit of that like showmanship type of thing. You saw it at the beginning of the podcast, right?
I think,
So
Jonah, I think what it is if you show up on
you muted yourself. Hold on.
sorry,
I think you're
my
no,
phone rang and it picked up my headphones. All right.
gotcha. No worries. Yep, we can.
Okay, so the problem with showing up in an unauthentic way online is that you may get invited to the first, party or event or, to be a speaker at a conference. But guess what? You're not getting invited back because they didn't like what you showed up as. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense.
And so, like, how exhausting would it be to have one life online and another behind closed doors? Um, I don't want to ever have to remember, like, oh, yeah, I told someone this, but this is actually how it really is, whether it's a lie or not. That sounds exhausting. And so I show up like the same way anywhere, and people gravitate toward that because that's the person that you want to lend your money to, go on vacation with, hire their design company instead of some
Right.
other interior designer. People only want to do business with people that they like. And how can someone like you if you're not showing up the way that you are all the time?
No, I love it so much. So I appreciate it. We're getting to the end of the podcast. I want to respect your time, right? So real quick, I always end the podcast with a certain question too, and it's this. If you were to go back, Sarah, to yourself, your 25-year-old self, right when you were just starting to get into real estate, what would you say to yourself then, knowing everything that you know now?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm gonna say something that I think not very many guests would probably say, and I would have chilled out more. Like I might not sound now like
Mhm.
I'm wound pretty tight, but I was really stressed. I was so stressed about money. I really thought that like I was just always going to struggle with money. And so if I could go back, I would just like, oh man, I would just go back and like hug her so tight and probably whisper in her ear like, dude, life is going to be so good. You won't even imagine the types of things that you get to do and the hotels that you're going to stay in. And maybe read just as many books. I read a lot of books, maybe even read more books. But stress less and kiss more boys and stay out late and just have more fun is really what I would have told myself. Now, if you're a listener and that is not appropriate advice for you because you're already staying out too late and not reading enough books,
Right.
then my other piece of advice would be to bet on yourself. Like I would have bet on myself, not necessarily sooner. I don't regret like when I quit my job and when I bought real estate because the reality is that I bought a house and then I moved to Argentina. I lived in South America, lived in Bali. I was doing all these fun things while I was buying real estate. But I just wish that I had bet on myself sooner. And so if you are educated and you really know your stuff, then go for it. Bet on yourself.
I love it. I love it so much. Well, Sarah, where can people find you? What do you want to promote? What is it? Anything specific you want people to go to right now? What do you want my audience to know about you? How do they find you? All that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So if anything resonated with you guys, please reach out. I love hearing from audiences. So my Instagram is Sarah D. Weaver. My website is sarahdweaver.com. And if you're feeling stuck, like, hey, I'm listening to this podcast, I'm like going through the motion, but I don't quite have that life that I want, then maybe we should work together. Maybe you should think about joining my coaching program. really like put time, money, and energy into the life that you want. And I'm sure that I can help you.
I love it. I love it so much. Well, Sarah, thank you again so much for coming on. You've been an amazing guest. I appreciate you. And guys, next week we'll just have Scorch the Fears and Casual and Coffee. Nothing crazy next week. We're kind of winding. We're not going to do anything insane because the holidays are coming up. But afterwards, there's going to be another challenge just like there was last week. So stay tuned for that. It'll be cool. I'll show you guys how to close some deals. And Sarah, I truly appreciate you coming on. This is Scorch the Fears, episode 102. Let's freaking go.